Dwayne "The Rock Jock Drop Top Pop Lock" Johnson. For most of his career, The Rock has been one of the safest bets in Hollywood, known as the guy that can do absolute numbers at the box office as long as his shirt's tight enough. But lately, things have taken a bit of a downturn for Maui, as his last couple films have been not so critically acclaimed, to put it nicely. There's even been stories about him being pretty difficult to work with, doing weird things like peeing in bottles and being hours late to set. And to make things worse, the conversation around best wrestler turned actor has gotten pretty intense, with Dave Bautista putting in that work and John Cena starting to gain some momentum with his role on Peacemaker. Fast forward to today, and it seems like Johnson is going to war with his superstar image, announcing he is transitioning into a serious actor. And so this time, it's not The Rock versus another wrestler, or a gorilla, or even the hierarchy of power in the DC universe. It's The Rock versus acting. Directed by Benny Safdie, The Smashing Machine tells the story of Mark Kerr, a UFC champion whose battles inside of the cage were nothing compared to the personal battles of his life. And right off the bat, the way Safdie approaches this film is the first clue that this movie isn't exactly what I thought it would be.
I was obsessed with recreating the reality of it, because in the recreation, you create something new. That's my feeling.
Despite its sports biopic branding, this film seems to be more focused on the athlete and his personal drama rather than the sport that he's in. You know, we start with the roar of a crowd, but the movie spends most of its time in apartments and lonely hotel rooms and gyms/locker rooms that are presented in a way that you can almost smell the sweat. And it looks nice and grainy. I think it was shot on like 16mm film, and that grounded aesthetic hints at the first problem for Dwayne Johnson. He doesn't get to be The Rock. There's no blockbuster polish or, superhero camera angles. Safdie intentionally shoots from weird, often like documentary-style angles that feel distinctly un-Hollywood. So through all that anti-glamour aesthetic, is The Rock able to match that energy? Johnson's performance is definitely the biggest standout of the whole film. Mark Kerr is a walking contradiction. He is a polite, soft-spoken man who just happens to be 300 pounds of muscle and beats up dudes for a living. Very gentle giant vibes. And it's a pretty fascinating duality. The film is pretty upfront about what his struggles are, but even without that, you really see the pain beneath the surface at all times. Like, one polite smile is the only defense he has left against a total breakdown. And it's in these quiet moments that I was really impressed with Dwayne's performance. He gives Mark this soft voice that would make Mr. Rogers proud.
Hello, and thank you to everyone for allowing me to be here today.
And the way he just expresses himself is like he's trying his best to be the most unthreatening person imaginable, despite his massive threatening size. And all that combined with the prosthetics gives us a movie where The Rock disappears for long stretches of time. Now, does the global superstar completely disappear? Not always. You can definitely see flashes of that blockbuster persona underneath, which isn't completely scene-breaking because Kerr himself is a bit of a showman in his own way, but there are moments where you can tell that Dwayne is fighting his own instincts to be, that overperformer, that charming character that he is in most of his films and that built his career. Emily Blunt as his partner Dawn matches him beautifully, becoming the first example of how this film subverts our expectations. Like I said, most of the battles in The Smashing Machine aren't happening in the cage, they're happening in kitchens and hotel rooms and carnivals, where Mark and Dawn are just trying and, often failing to understand each other. And despite, the come and go of her character's screen time, an issue that we'll talk about more later, Blunt plays that dynamic perfectly, revealing more of her character through body language and tone. I do think her arc would have benefited from, a bit more fleshing out, especially as it pertains to one of the, climaxes of the film. Now, something I do not think people are talking enough about is the score by Nala Sinefro. She's this experimental jazz musician, and apparently this is her first time scoring a film, which is wild to me because it sounds like she was meant to do this. The film had such a fitting soundtrack that I think everybody should go listen to. It's not your typical sports movie soundtrack. There aren't any hype tracks or dramatic crescendos. It's very soft and spacey and meditative. A lot of the songs remind me of the OG Minecraft soundtrack, and I mean that in the best way possible. Peaceful on the surface, but full of that quiet sadness underneath. And it gives the movie a heartbeat. Even when the story drifts, the music keeps you connected to what Mark's feeling, to the point where I think the soundtrack is probably my favorite part of the film. All right, so where are we at? We got great aesthetic, Johnson delivers, Blunt brought the drama, the music's on point. Sounds like a great movie, right? Well, here is the central paradox of The Smashing Machine. So while Johnson's over here succeeding in these vulnerable moments, the film tries to subvert the norms of a sports movie. We're talking about the training montage, the wise mentor, the big emotional fight, And while it has its successes, most of the time it fails to find a compelling replacement for those conventions that it's throwing away. The film is just so committed to giving us this messy, unglamorous reality that it kind of starves the audience of the essential beats that typically thrive in these films, bouncing between its battles in and out of the ring in a way that starts to feel directionless. And like the movie's pulling its punches, no pun intended. Don't get me wrong, you can see everything Safdie wants to say about, fame and masculinity and self-destruction, but it feels scattered. Big emotional beats get dropped and brought back way later, whole characters drop out of the story, and you almost forget they exist. And it's like the movie could only handle one idea at a time instead of just weaving it all into the story as a whole. Overall, the subversion of sports tropes is admirable, but the alternative isn't always more compelling. It's a bold approach that works sometimes and fits the themes, but it leaves the film feeling a bit muted. So what does this all mean for Black Adam? Well, the Smashing Machine is clearly The Rock's most ambitious role yet. It's also his riskiest, and it's him finally asking to be taken seriously. He doesn't quite escape his persona, but he comes pretty dang close, and it's because of his commitment to go against everything he knows and becoming this soft, broken person. The film itself is a bit messy, inconsistent, sometimes directionless, but it is undeniably brave in its anti-blockbuster approach. So if this is The Rock's first real attempt at breaking his image, I think he did a great job, and I feel like he should keep going and keep trying. Anyway, that's all I got. Let me know what you think.
It doesn't matter what you think.